I still can't believe it, even now. It's been months, and the image of that day is burned into my mind like a brand. My brother's funeral. My brother, who was supposed to be dead, gone forever, a casualty of war. But he wasn't. He was there, in that casket, breathing, alive. And the only reason I knew was because of my war dog, Sergeant, who nudged the lid open with his nose and whimpered. Was I wrong for what I did next? Tell me, would you have done the same thing if your world had been shattered and then pieced back together in the most horrifyingly miraculous way possible? It started, as most things do, with a phone call. Not the kind of call you expect on a Tuesday morning, not ever, really. It was my mother, her voice a thin, reedy thing I barely recognized, even though I'd known it my entire life. He's gone, sweetie. She'd choked out, and the words, so simple, so final, had cleaved my life in two. My brother, Michael, my older brother, my protector, my best friend, was dead, killed in action, a roadside bomb in some godforsaken desert town I couldn't even pronounce. Michael had always been the brave one, the adventurous one. I was the quieter, more studious sister. He'd joined the Marines right out of high school, full of patriotic fervor and a desire to make a difference. I'd gone to college, pursued a career in veterinary medicine, always staying stateside, always worrying. He'd sent me letters, emails, even a few blurry video calls when he could. He told me about the heat, the sand, the camaraderie, and the fear. He never sugarcoated it, not for me. He knew I could handle the truth. He'd even told me about Sergeant, the German Shepherd mix he'd been paired with for his last deployment. Sergeant was a bomb, sniffing dog, highly trained, fiercely loyal. Michael adored him, spoke of him with a reverence usually reserved for family members. He saved my life more times than I can count, sis. Michael had written once, "He's a true hero. If anything ever happens to me, you make sure Sergeant gets a good home. He deserves it." I remember reading that, tears stinging my eyes, a cold premonition creeping up my spine. Then came the call. The official call from the military. The somber voice on the other end, the respectful condolences, the offer of support. It was all a blur. My parents were devastated, of course. My father, a man of few words, walked around the house like a ghost, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. My mother cried for days, her grief a raw, open wound. I tried to be strong for them, but inside I was crumbling. Michael was my anchor, my rock. Who would I turn to now? The military arranged for Michael's body to be flown home. There would be a closed casket funeral, they said, due to the nature of his injuries. That detail gnawed at me, a constant, dull ache in my chest. I wanted to see him, to say good-bye properly, but I understood. War was brutal, and it didn't discriminate. Then, a week before the funeral, a surprise. A knock on my door, and there stood a young Marine in dress blues, holding a leash. At the end of that leash was Sergeant. He was thinner than I expected, his fur a little duller, but his eyes, those intelligent, watchful eyes, were unmistakable. "He's yours now, ma'am," the Marine said, his voice quiet. "Per Specialist Miller's last wishes. He's been cleared for adoption." I knelt down, and Sergeant, after a moment of wary assessment, nuzzled his head into my hand. His fur was rough, and I could feel the faint tremors running through his body. He was grieving too, I realized. He had lost his person, his partner. He understood, in his own way, what had happened. Taking care of Sergeant became my new focus. It was a distraction from the crushing grief, a way to connect with Michael, even in his absence. We went for long walks, I brushed his fur, I talked to him, telling him stories about Michael, about our childhood, about how much we missed him. Sargent would listen, his head tilted, his ears perked. He was a good listener. He seemed to understand my pain, and in turn, I understood his. He was restless, though, especially at night. He would pace, whine softly, sometimes scratch at the doors or windows. I figured it was the trauma of war, the change in his routine. I tried to soothe him, to reassure him. He was safe now with me. The day of the funeral dawned bleak and gray, mirroring the mood in our small town. The church was packed, overflowing with friends, family, and military personnel. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and sorrow. My parents sat in the front pew, stoic and heartbroken. I sat beside them, Sargent curled at my feet, unusually quiet, his nose tucked under my arm. The casket, draped with an American flag, sat at the front of the altar. It was a dark, polished wood, utterly final. I kept staring at it, trying to reconcile the idea of my vibrant, full-of-life brother being inside that cold box. The service was a blur of eulogies, hymns, and the mournful sound of taps. I barely registered any of it. My mind was reeling, trying to process the enormity of it all. This was it. This was goodbye. As the pallbearers began to move the casket towards the hearse, something shifted in Sargent. He tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His ears went flat, and his eyes, usually so calm, were wide and alert. He began to pull against his leash, straining towards the casket. "Sergeant, no," I whispered, trying to hold him back. But he was stronger than I expected, his focus absolute. He wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but he was insistent. He let out a sharp bark, a sound that cut through the somber silence of the church. Heads turned, a few people gasped. My father shot me a bewildered look. I tried to apologize, to pull Sargent away, but he dug his paws in, whining now, a high-pitched, desperate sound. The pallbearers paused, unsure what to do. One of the military chaplains approached, a concerned look on his face. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked gently. He just misses Michael." I stammered, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. He was Michael's K-9 partner. Sargent, ignoring my attempts to restrain him, suddenly lunged forward, breaking free from my grip. He bounded towards the casket, his movements precise and purposeful. He sniffed at the polished wood, then let out another sharp bark. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He nudged the lid of the casket with his nose. And it moved, just a fraction, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift. But it moved. A gasp rippled through the church. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was happening? Sargent whimpered again, a low, urgent sound, and nudged the lid once more. This time it shifted further, revealing a sliver of darkness beneath. And then a sound, a faint, almost inaudible sound, like a sigh. My breath hitched. I stumbled forward, pushing past shocked mourners, my eyes glued to the casket. Sargent was still there, pawing gently at the lid, his tail giving a low, tentative wag. He looked at me, then back at the casket, as if urging me to see. I reached the casket, my hand trembling as I touched the cold wood. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A mistake, a trick of the light, but then I saw it. A flicker of movement, inside. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. What would you have done if your war dog, who was supposed to be grieving his fallen partner, had just led you to a horrifying discovery at his own funeral? Would you have dismissed it as grief, as a dog's strange behavior, or would you have dared to believe the impossible? I didn't hesitate. My logical brain, the one that usually governed my actions, was completely overridden by a primal instinct, a desperate hope. I grabbed the edge of the casket lid and, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, pulled it open. The gasps from the congregation were louder this time, a collective cry of disbelief. My parents screamed. And there he was, Michael, my brother, lying in the casket, his eyes closed. But his chest was rising and falling, ever so slightly. He was breathing, he was alive. He was pale, thinner than I remembered, and there was a faint scar on his temple, but it was him. It was unmistakably Michael. Sargent let out a joyous bark, jumping up and placing his paws gently on the edge of the casket, licking Michael's face. Michael stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. He looked confused, disoriented, his gaze slowly settling on me. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice weak but undeniably his own. Chaos erupted. People rushed forward, some screaming, some crying, some simply staring in stunned silence. My parents were beside me in an instant, my mother weeping tears of joy, my father gripping Michael's hand, his face a mixture of shock and profound relief. The military personnel, initially confused, quickly moved to secure the area, ushering everyone out of the church. Within minutes, paramedics were swarming around Michael, checking his vitals, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. He was unconscious again, but he was alive. The story that unfolded over the next few days was almost unbelievable. It turned out Michael hadn't been killed in the roadside bomb attack. He had been gravely injured, sustaining a severe head trauma that had put him in a coma. In the confusion and chaos of the battlefield, compounded by a catastrophic intelligence error, he had been misidentified. Another soldier, with similar physical characteristics and carrying Michael's dog tags, which he had borrowed for a patrol, had been the casualty. The military had swiftly, tragically, and wrongly identified the body as Michael's. They had transported him to a field hospital where he had been stabilized but remained unconscious. The hospital, overwhelmed with casualties, had somehow overlooked him, assuming he was merely awaiting transport for burial, still identified as the other soldier. It was a horrific series of blunders, a perfect storm of mistakes that had led to my brother being declared dead and shipped home in a casket. He had been in that casket for nearly 2 days, kept alive by some miracle, by the faint pulse of his own heart, by the oxygen still available within the sealed space. The doctors later told us that the cool temperature inside the casket, combined with his reduced metabolic state from the coma, had essentially put him in a kind of suspended animation, preserving him. They said he wouldn't have lasted much longer. Sargent, with his keen sense of smell and his unwavering loyalty, had been the only one who knew. He had smelled Michael, smelled the faint scent of life where there should have been only the scent of death. He had known, instinctively, that his partner was still there, still breathing. He had saved Michael's life not once, but twice. Michael spent weeks in the hospital, recovering. His memory was a bit hazy from the trauma, but he slowly regained his strength. He was furious, of course, when he learned the full story, but mostly he was just grateful to be alive. And he was incredibly grateful to Sargent. He never let the dog out of his sight. Sargent, for his part, was a changed dog. His restlessness was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. He would lie by Michael's bed for hours, his head on his paws, his eyes never leaving his person. The military launched a full investigation, promising to hold those responsible accountable. There were apologies, deep and sincere, from the highest levels. They offered our family every conceivable support, every form of compensation, but nothing could truly erase the trauma of those weeks. My parents, though overjoyed, were forever changed by the ordeal. They cling to Michael now, unwilling to let him out of their sight. As for me, I learned a profound lesson about faith, about hope, and about the extraordinary bond between a human and an animal. Sargent wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian angel, a silent hero who refused to let my brother be buried alive. He refused to let our family lose Michael. He defied all odds, all logic, all human error. I often think about that moment in the church, the sheer terror and exhilaration that coursed through me, the disbelief on everyone's faces, the impossible reality unfolding before our eyes. It was a day that changed everything, a day that proved miracles, in their own strange and messy way, can truly happen. So, what do you think? Was I wrong to open that casket, to defy every convention and protocol? Or was it the only thing I could have done? Like this video if you were on my side, if you believe in the impossible. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that challenge belief and touch the heart. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.